So the reason we do this is because every year about this time, when we start putting our gardens together and selling plants and stuff, everybody comes and says, where do I get good soil? And I don't have a good answer for you because there's not a lot of good soil around here. We live in the desert. It's dry as can be. Everything cracks and dries out. And all the stuff that was alive in it, if there's no cover over the soil, it dies. So that's why we're here. So we need to go to the presentation. I'm going to get started right away, guys, because we have like 3 presentations to get through. They're about 35 to 45 minutes each, and we'll have a 10-minute break in between. If you haven't got any refreshments, please feel free. We're really informal here. If you're hungry, excellent. So welcome to the Soil Summit, first annual FoodScape Soil Summit for Yavapai County. Our goal here is not only just to learn how to build soil, but also to bring together all of you in your respective areas, in your localities, in your neighborhoods, in the people right next to you, if possible. I know we're still building small beginnings, but we want you to know your neighbors. We want you to know what resources each of you have to share with each other, and we want to make relationships happen so that we can start doing that kind of stuff. Are we all right? Okay. So let's see. Do I push this guy? Okay. So these are the organizations that we're associated with. FoodScape.tips is my company and a website. If you go to FoodScape.tips, there's lots of great resources for growing gardens in northern Arizona. I've been doing that for 20 years here, and we've done all the wrong things. And we finally figured out how things work pretty well here. Make 100 Healthy, Be Organic Farm, all these guys are here. God Squad, Gardeners of Destiny, MycoLife.Institute. We'll not hear from Catherine today because she couldn't make it. We've got Sun Valley Harvest in the back here doing mushroom stuff, and my friend East of Eden grower, Creedmoor Fury from North Carolina. He's a high-level soil biologist. We're doing some question and answer sessions if you guys have those type of questions. So I would like to introduce my friend John Murphy to talk a little bit about Make 100 Healthy and what they're doing, so that you guys know what we do. How do I go back? And we'll also be getting introduced to Stephanie Leon, who is of the Prescott Food Forest world. And so, John, you're on your way up here. Thank you, John. Without John, this stuff wouldn't be happening without all these guys working with me.
Is the mic on? Hello, everybody. How you doing?
All right.
So before we get started, we need to have a little bit.
Just a little bit away.
Okay, a little bit. I'm excited about this. We have to have a round of applause for this man. This is his vision. This is something that didn't exist, and he created a soil summit. And look at how many people we have. So, Greg, let's give him a big round of applause. It's so nice to see so many people here, and our community in Yavapai County and northern Arizona is just literally growing, pardon the pun. And we have a lot of things happening. Make 100 Healthy, my nonprofit, we just had a golf tournament, and we do different events and marketing, and we try to create the excitement and the interest to help people like Greg and Stephanie really give to you in the community. Our organization has worked with FoodScape Tips and Prescott Food Forest, and we're creating some really great opportunities to grow food. Has anybody heard of the Prescott Food Forest before? Well, thank you. And the person that is in charge of that, who is really the director, Stephanie Leon, has been the administrator for this event. Let's give her a round of applause. And she's going to talk about what Prescott Food Forest, we have classes coming up. But this, I will say this, you cannot grow good food unless you have good soil. Okay, so we all have to become dirt farmers to make sure that if and when we have to grow food for necessity, that we're not guessing, that we know the formula. And that's what this man's all about. Permaculture is letting it grow where it is and nurturing it, let it go the way God intended. There's not a coincidence that our gardening education program is called Gardeners of Destiny, G-O-D. And that formed our volunteer corps, the God Squad. The Gardeners of Destiny Squad will go out, and if any of you need help, we are building a core group of volunteers that will come. We had a lady last year, she had 4 peach trees all the peaches were dropping on the ground and they were going to the muskrats and the pack rats. We were able to harvest over 1,000 peaches. We gave them away to people. We had people make jelly and jam. It was really cool. So this is not about me. This is not about Greg. It's not about Stephanie. It's about us all being super seed planters of growing food, and why it's so important that we have to eat real food, because the food supply is bad and we can do better. So with that being said, I'd like to bring up Stephanie to tell us you all about our 8-week summer gardening class at Be Organic Farm in Chino Valley. We're very blessed to have almost an acre farm. We have a greenhouse and we have a raised bed garden in the back. And every week we have 30, 40 people there. So it's really good. Without further ado, let's have a big hand for Stephanie Leon.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie, and I'm the director of the Prescott Food Forest. I run the education program mostly, and then we have some core volunteers who help out a lot with all the gardening needs. We've got Leroy and Deb back here who are amazing, and they work our outdoor garden. Hi, guys. And then we have Greg who comes into, and it's just this huge team effort. And what the 8-week program is a course every Saturday morning for 8 weeks. And you come in and you sit down and I give you, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. So you come in and we sit down and we have class for about 45 minutes, usually maybe up to an hour, depending if we have a guest speaker. And then for the next 30, 45 minutes, we actually work in the community gardening as our learning space. So as you're working the garden and you're learning how to prune tomatoes or to plant seeds, whatever it is, you're working the community garden. And everything that we grow within that garden space goes to our volunteers, to our students, and most of it goes to local food banks and kitchens. So it's really good all the way around. If you are interested in possibly taking these courses, the next one starts June 8th, I think. Whatever that Saturday is, not June. Well, if June 1st is a Saturday, it must be the 8th. So it starts on June 8th. It's from 10 o'clock to noon out in Chino Valley at Be Organic Farm. And if you want to sign up, go to PrescottFoodForest.com. When you go to PrescottFoodForest.com, right on the front page, you will see a pretty little picture. It looks like this. Sorry, I meant to grab this on my way up, and John surprised me and pulled me up really soon. Okay, so the picture at the top that says summer, it'll look a lot like that. You just click on that link and it will take you directly to the page for registration. So you have a couple of options. The 8-week course is $99. It's worth $199, but thanks to some sponsors that we had for an event recently, it's down to $99. And if you want to take it for free, you can certainly do that. The only thing we ask is that in return, you volunteer an additional 10 hours outside of class time. Very good.
All right.
Great. So please go to PrescottFoodForest.com if you're interested. And we talk about all sorts of stuff. So it's very basic, if you've been gardening for 1 or 2 years and you're really struggling with it, if you've kind of been in it and you kind of know what you're doing, but you want a little bit more context, this is definitely a great class for you.
Awesome.
Sorry.
No, keep going.
So we go over everything from starting seeds to planting plants. We do a lot of pruning. We do soil work. I have guest speakers come in. Greg is one of our guest speakers. You're going to hear a lot about Back to Eden gardening tonight, which is what he does, and he'll speak about. Then we usually have Catherine Crew come in, and she talks about microbiology and living soil, and it's really amazing. So if you're interested, it starts June 8th, and you need to get registered really soon because the class is already halfway full.
Awesome.
Okay, any questions about that? Okay, great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Greg Eddolls. I also own Tri-City Computers. That's my main thing. That's what I do for a living. I would love to do FoodScape.tips 7 days a week, but we're just not quite there yet. So this is my 2022 Midsummer Back to Eden garden. You know, this is kind of what you have to look forward to if you start to build out your microbiome and get a beautifully year-round permaculture performing garden. So let's start with master gardeners. How many of you are master gardeners? That reminds me. do this. How many of you are master gardeners? Anyone? Anyone? Hands? 1, 2. Anyone else here? So we got 2 master gardeners. Excellent. I mean, that's an excellent start to help formulating what we need in the garden. How long have you guys been gardening? Is this your first season? Anybody? Anyone? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. How about 5 years or more? 2 years. Okay. 10 years or more? Yarnell over here. And okay, how about 15 years or more? 20 years or more? You guys might know more than I do, but be nice to me, okay? And I'll have also, how many of you are new to Arizona gardening? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so kind of a different environment, isn't it? The desert's the brutal ends everything for you. So we're going to talk today about observations of gardening methods over the last 20 years. I'm going to try to move pretty quick, but there's a lot of information. This video will be available like afterwards, and we'll make sure that you guys get the email with the link if you'd like to study more information. So the science project garden, this is where we all start, right? We'll get into that. Organic gardening, permaculture, sustainable back to Eden gardening with animals. Mycelium mushroom benefits and how that works. Catherine Crew was going to speak for us, but instead we've got Kevin Fitzgerald to fill in that space. So he's going to do a great job. And finally, we'll touch on electroculture gardening methods and theoreticals. So science project, usually no direct experience or knowledge of any gardening practices. So usually a first season, maybe even the first few years. Usually materials purchased at a local home improvement store because, well, where else are we going to get them from? Unless we make them, right? Use of synthetic fertilizers and bagged soil, which we don't like to encourage, with FoodScape here. Use of herbicides and pesticides, absolute no-no, but that's what we do because we've been told to do that. So often separated from the ground by a raised bed or by plastic. I did it, but when we start to understand that attached to the ground is preferred than from separated, then we start to change our methods. And lastly, general lack of knowledge and connection to how plants and soil work. So it's really important for us to understand all of that is kind of the beginning stage, right? This would be like one of my first gardens. It's dirt. This is the dirt that you get from a materials provider, like from landscape materials around here. I've had mixed reports, mostly not good from their gardening. Yes? Okay. And then, so here's if you till it, you kill it. Kill what? The microbiome. So heard of the Dust Bowl? Basically what I'm doing here, you see that every living thing in there is going to be getting destroyed and ripped up and killed, right? But the things that are in that soil, keeping those things alive, are the moisture and all the nutrients and all the living organisms, which I just destroyed by doing this. There's no cover over this soil. And what this is trying to do is actually grow a cover over the soil and die and deposit organic carbon material. Getting ahead of myself. This is a standard organic garden without any soil cover. You can do pretty good, right? But the organic part just means that we're not using any of those synthetics. And that's a really great place to start permaculture. So the organic gardening approach, use of organic materials, certified to not have synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. The beginning of learning about natural pest control methods like soapy water and loving attention. We spray soapy water to get the aphids off, and we take our time with that plant to clean it all up so that it can survive for the next week. That's the beginning, right? Natural manual weed control maintenance, smart tools for getting weeds out easily in that really packed soil, right? Because all of us have a hard pan soil pretty much that we start with, and weeds are our biggest nemesis. At least that's our perception. I'm going to change that perception a little bit for you, I hope. Well-drained organic soil, compost, and mixing soil types. So this is where we start to get into the difference with experimental gardening, and then you've been doing it a while and you're still organic gardening. You're mixing compost, you're mixing different nutrients and stuff into your soil that are all organic, and that's great. The mixing mindset is what I'm trying to get away from for the outside garden, because it's a lot of money to mix a lot of soil, and we seem to have to do it every year, right? greenhouse soil, well-drained organic soil, compost, and mixing soil types, greenhouse soil creation processes. My greenhouse soil is a little bit different than a lot different than my outside back to Eden area, but they work together pretty well. And lastly, still tilling the ground and using organic fertilizers of various kinds. If you till it, you kill it. And so now this model of mixing soil, you basically have, you put your stuff in for the season, it lasts for the season, and then we till it all up and get all the weeds out and we put more material in the next season. Now, industrial farmers that do this, they put too much salt-based synthetic fertilizers in the soil and they begin to destroy the capability of the soil to support living organisms. And that's when you have the Dust Bowl or and all that kind of stuff, because there's no topsoil to hold everything down. So this would be like an effort at mixing wood mulch in the soil. This is my backyard garden. These are progression shots that you guys are seeing from my own backyard. And so we did the nice furrows. We put all this really nice soil and compost and wood mulch in there, really well developed wood mulch. And so we thought, wow, this is great. And put in a nice crazy watering system, gravity water feed. That doesn't really help. Like, it doesn't help the quality of the garden, but it was a fun experiment. Using black plastic mulch to keep the weeds down. There's lots of different types of material like this for mulch, but what I realized when I did this with the furrows is by the end of the season, everything was hard as a rock again, because what I had done was till all this soil up, added all this material to it, and all the good microorganisms and worms got in there and all those furrows all underneath the warm plastic and moisture in there. And they pretty much ate most of the organic material out of those furrows. And what I had left was rock hard clay soil again, that I had to rip up all the plastic, till the whole thing again. It's just too much work. It's not necessary. But this was the best organic garden I've ever had. I didn't have a final picture of this, but this was an amazing garden. So let's talk a little bit about permaculture. What exactly is permaculture? The observation and assistance of natural plant cycle processes, observing the entire plant cycle from germination to seed, and the natural propagation methods. Oh yeah? That's all right. So the idea of, when you see something go to seed, like, I'll just tell you one example. I didn't know this, I'm learning all the time. I'm not a scientist. I do have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Systems, but that doesn't help food that much. But beets, for example, we plant beets in the spring, seed. Oh yeah? Okay, good. So they come up, by the end of the season, you've got beets that you harvest, but you might leave some there, right? Those beets that you leave there are going to overwinter in the soil. They're going to pop up next spring, and they're going to start producing seed for you by about mid-August up here anyway. And I picked up off of a 20-foot row about 2-gallon bags, sealed bags of beet seeds, right? And then you don't have to ever buy seeds again, right? So permaculture allows for harvesting of seeds and sometimes preservation of the plant through the entire winter cycle into spring. And of course, this depends on the conditions, the location, and the plant. But I encourage you to watch the plants instead of ripping out of the ground at the end of the season. Watch the plants. Maybe throw some more wood mulch on top of that so that you can overwinter them a little bit, protect their roots. Permaculture observation gives you the growing experience from start to finish and all over again for every plant type. So there's a lot of different plant types out there. So like this doesn't work as well for, like, for example, peppers. I let the pepper pods sit on the plant, they ferment, the seed goes bad. So that's the kind of thing you have to pull off and harvest the seed. Whereas these things like cold crops, like beets and stuff like that, they'll drop all the seed and go crazy in your yard. So best organic garden ever. I think I skipped somehow. Let's see. I'm going the wrong way. That's why. So, all right. So use of wood mulch, manure, water, worms, fungi, and building of living microbiome with a cover over native soil. This is back to Eden gardening. Is that what that says? I wish I had a view of that top line. We want to emulate the natural forest woodfall ground cover. If you go out in the forest, nobody's tilling, nobody's fertilizing, nobody's even watering. But if you scratch down in that soil a bit, it's going to be wet down in 4 or 5 inches down there, you're going to have some moisture at least. And you might see some really beautiful black loamy soil. And that's what the forest is doing. That's God's way of continuing to build up the soil with a cover so that all the living organisms underneath that cover can stay alive and provide all the nutrients through the soil food network that feeds the entire forest over miles and miles. So I do use occasional natural fertilizers like fish emulsion. That's my favorite. That's at least a weekly. Blood meal, bone meal, diatomaceous earth, and dusted eggshells. That's for bone meal. You know, you guys probably know blood meal, nitrogen. Bone meal is good for calcium and phosphorus. Diatomaceous earth is good for silica, calcium, and I believe magnesium. And of course, dusted eggshells, you get that. That's always a good bet. We water the entire face of the ground with Back to Eden gardening because just underneath the entire space of microbiome is teeming with life. So beneficial molds, fungi, bacteria, worms, and other microorganisms and insects. All of those guys are eating that organic material and pooping it out, and you're sticking your hands in it and loving it because that's what we like. That's what actually works, and we know it works. So Back to Eden gardening, I actually learned this. You want me to come over here? Back to Eden gardening, let's see, first attempt with wood mulch. Yeah, this was our first attempt with wood mulch trying to implement Back to Eden ideas. And here's what you need to know. Yes, sir? Dusted eggshells. Oh, yeah, so I'll take the eggshells, put them in my Ninja blender, and turn them into dust. Yes, pulverized. Sorry. What's that? I'll do this. All right, so this was the first attempt. We thought this is a great idea. We'll dig some holes in the clay and put good soil in there and put some wood mulch around. But, you know, with only 2 to 3 inches of wood mulch, you're encouraging every seed that's on the surface of the ground. All the weeds, all the grass, everything that blows in, it's going to grow because it's got access close enough to the soil and the moisture that you're going to actually produce what you don't really want to produce. What you need to do when you're building a Back to Eden garden is throw 12 inches of wood mulch. You got to think smother. You're smothering everything. Some people will they'll cut the weeds down, throw some cardboard over it, and then put the 12 inches of wood mulch over, just to make sure they're smothering all that material. All that organic material is going to turn into food for all of the living things underneath the cover of your soil, right? Okay, so this was the worst idea. This was terrible. And so then we said, well, we must have too much clay and rocks and stuff, so we're going to just sift all the rocks out of this soil. And it took like 3-4 weeks. Yeah, kicking his butt. That's my son-in-law before he was my son-in-law, and he was hooking up with some hard labor. But this was totally unnecessary. We were improving the soil, but we didn't really need to do that because it didn't improve it. You cannot really improve clay. It's going to stay clay. It's going to be hard pan. It's going to be hard packed. And you can rip it up with like this or with a rototiller. It's not worth it. The side benefit was lots of rocks for landscaping. Black plastic, beautiful, right? It's all done up, real beautiful, sand, flagstone. But this was not worth it. And what did we do? We went and tilled it all over again just to make sure it was mixed really good. This is the last time we ever did this to our space. So we did try Back to Eden. I'm going as fast as I can. We tried Back to Eden for 3 years. And 3 years is about where you need to be to have a mature homeostasis, like well-developed microbiome underneath the cover of your soil. Well, at about year 3, the end of year 3, we had to scrape it all off to fix the septic system. And it does not keep all that living goodness in there when you move it over to a pile. Is this me? Oh, all right. When you move it over into a pile and then you put it back like a month later, it's dead. It's gone. You killed it. And so this is when we're starting over again. Let's see. I've lost my... Okay, there we go. Next year, my wife did a full redesign. This picture was going on 3rd year since we started over, right? So back to Eden all over again. And this is later that season. So the dark level of soil that you see in there is really getting to the level where we haven't added wood mulch to it for 3 years, and now it's about time to add more wood mulch. So let's talk about weeds, wood, and carbon. Weeds accumulate carbon biomass. And by the way, there's going to be a question and answer at the end of everything, okay? I want to get through all the presentations, so write down questions if you have them. And I'm going to activate a question and answer session for the Zoom people, but you guys can actively ask your questions here. So weeds accumulate carbon biomass. Weeds grow in bacteria-rich soils depleted of carbon wood. Weeds have one job. So when you buy a new house and they scraped it all off and all those weeds are going nuts, they're trying to grow up, die, and deposit a layer of carbon wood as a cover over the hard pan that you just scraped blank. And it's trying to become life again. Right? So once the cover of wood carbon over the soil is of sufficient depth, it will host mushroom mycorrhiza and other soil microorganisms. This is the beginning of the life in the soil. These will multiply and digest the dead organic matter, turning it into beautiful black loamy soil. And that's what you want. Yes, I'll make that. Yeah, I know there's a lot to cover. So thanks for your patience with all that. So this is in my own backyard. I just lifted up a rock or a piece of wood or something. That's a mycelium network, mushroom mycorrhiza. That's what it looks like. This is all throughout your soil if it's got a properly inoculated mycelium network. This right here is what you get when you first start a Back to Eden garden about 3 months in. This is, as my friend Creedmoor will note, it's not mold, but some people call it a slime mold or dog vomit mold. It's actually an amoeba, which feeds on fungi. And so that tells you also that you have fungi in your microbiome. That's evidence of it right there. So that's a good thing if you see that. That's when I usually back off the watering just a little bit and just let it keep cooking, like keep doing its thing. So this is year 6 of Back to Eden, second attempt, midsummer. Takes about 3 years to achieve a mature microbiome. So you can see it's got more brown, light brown color to it rather than the dark soil like in that last picture, because we've added a whole bunch on top of it. And once you add, the fungi and all these things in the soil are going to keep eating it from the bottom up. And they're going to keep eating it faster and faster as you keep adding more, because your layer of actual fungi and microbiome is getting thicker. Now, when you first do a garden with microbiome or wood mulch and stuff, you're not going to have a well-developed microbiome. It's going to be frustrating as heck. Your stuff is going to look like garbage. It won't grow very well. The skins will be really thick. Everything will be really woody. You can sort of mitigate that by opening up your hole in the wood mulch and throwing a bunch of good soil in there. You might do some bone meal, blood meal, diatomaceous earth, fish emulsion to get yourself through the 3-year period and still enjoy your garden. So just be aware that it's kind of going to be frustrating, but by the time you hit year 4, it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. Messing up with this. Come on, there we go. All right, so basics of fungi, and I'm going to let Kevin talk a lot more about this. Fungi digest organic matter, so plant life and itself can access nutrients which contribute to its growth. Mycelium and fungi networks work in symbiosis with bacteria surrounding the roots of the plants. Can't even hardly see that. The bacteria feeds on sugars from the plant's photosynthetic processes and communicates with the fungi soil food network to retrieve nutrients deep in nooks and crannies of the soil unreachable by the plant roots themselves. This is the part that you really need to understand, that you're building a soil food network. How many of you guys heard that term already? Soil food network. Anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So I'm glad we said it. Yeah, good. So basically that's what's feeding everything. Kevin's going to get a little bit deeper into some of the fungi stuff with us, so I'm going to move on from that. I want to touch on sustainability, because this is about the future as well. For whatever reason, even if it's not some dastardly reason that we are all out of like supplies, sustainability is if the truck stopped delivering to your favorite home store, can you still get the stuff? Can you get it? I get peat moss. I rely on that. I got to figure out a supply that's going to do a replacement for peat moss if I can't get that peat moss. This is why I also do the outside soil, because that peat moss is for my greenhouse pots, right? But that's a whole different process of making soil than doing the back to Eden gardening. So there's two things going on here, and there's even a few more things, but sustainability supports local healthy food production, local agricultural development, because like manure, people have manure, you need the manure, local food culture and markets, because you're hopefully going to be developing relationships with people that will give you these resources for free, or maybe in trade, or maybe you can work with them in your local neighborhood. That's one of our main pushes for doing this whole event. So the animal garden relationship, I have chickens. And so we produce animal manure seasonal ecosystems for growing and planting your own plants. Animals eat the kitchen and garden scraps. We throw everything into a pen where they've got two houses. It's an enclosed space, and everything goes in the middle, and they eat on it, they poo on it, they stamp it down, they scratch it around, and they turn it into a beautiful composted manure, or manured compost, we call it. That's got a lot of green material in it, and we cook that all year long through the winter and put a cover over it near the end of the winter so it can finish its cooking. And then we start harvesting that in spring, and we mix 50% peat moss and this type of deal. And then, this is the cycle here. They give us manure, we grow plants, we feed them with the plants. Lots of weeds in the garden that the chickens like. You'd be surprised how much is actually chicken food instead of that terrible weed that you have to get rid of and stick in a bag and throw in the trash. Actually, that's organic material that you should be putting back in your yard. That's my opinion. So the soil has been developing all winter. Now we're on year 8 of Back to Eden gardening. So that's what my soil looks like now, with that this black kind of color. That's what that looks like. Immediately after these pictures, I threw another 6 inches of wood mulch on top of that, because that's their food, and you want to keep them alive. All right. Deep breath, because we're about to go into a little bit more crazy. Okay. And this is just a little fun, so don't get too crazy about this if you don't understand it, because I enjoy this. It's electrochemical biology in nature, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. I got this from the School of YouTube, guys, School of Google. There's lots of studies out there where you can get this kind of information. So electroculture, is it fact or fiction? A lot of people think it's woo-woo. What is electroculture? The capturing of positively charged particles from all manner of electromagnetic wavelengths. That could be atmospheric, telluric, which means of the earth, as well as local sources such as 5,000 watts of FM power. I'm sure you guys have heard that somewhere. So my first antenna that I built was a 150 centimeter antenna targeting 98.5 FM signal right in the middle of the FM dial, because I know energy is coming off of that wavelength, most likely, and I'll be able to capture it in my garden. So we direct that energy naturally to earth ground negative, where it can be used in the soil for transfer of ionic form elements, like from the periodic table elements, in the electrochemical soil gradient. So this is how things move through the soil. To understand how it's not woo-woo, you have to understand how things actually move through the soil and how the energy works. So this is a couple of the electroculture antennas I made. This one is an L shape. That's the one I was telling you about, 150 centimeters, vertical and horizontally polarized to pick up waves of energy, right? And direct them straight into the soil. We're talking not a ton of electricity. You're not going to get shocked by this. This is at the ionic level, at the atomic, at the molecular level, where an ion is an unevenly balanced, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, electroculture antenna wrapped for contact, right? So this was connected all the way up, all the way down. And this guy right here, 2 feet into the ground, strapped in real good. So we're making sure that we have a good flow into the ground of any extra energy. This is another simple one, just a basic doweling rod. The people that I think are close, one sec, are closer to woo, what? Yes? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, these are copper. If I didn't say that, I apologize. So you can get copper for 12 gauge copper by 31 cents a foot at Home Depot in single strand, and just have some fun. It's actually a really fun thing to play with. What's not woo-woo? I say testing voltage potential is not woo-woo. So when I have an antenna copper in the ground like these, I can attach my positive probe to the top of it as high as I can go, and the negative into the ground as low as I can, and step on it. And I've pulled about 350 millivolts of voltage potential. Okay. Thanks. So I'm pulling about 350 millivolts, guys. So that means that there's actually something happening between the pathway of the antenna and down into the soil. So yeah, he's a stagehand. He's helping me out. So let's see. And then from antenna copper to plant parts. So here's an antenna up here, and it goes down into the ground. It comes up through a plant, and I've got a stem and a leaf coming out, and the nexus right there, I'm putting my probe right there. So it's testing all the way through, up through the plant, getting about 400 to 650 millivolts of voltage potential. That doesn't mean electricity amperage, like current, so that's why it's not going to shock you. Interesting note, if you switch the probes and watch your polarity, negative or positive changes. So we're actually measuring something real, okay? It's just such a light force that's happening, a light process. Now we're going to get into what ions are. A charged atom or molecule having not equal amounts of negative charged electrons and positive charged protons. So it just means it's unevenly charged particle, right? They call them anions and cations, which is negative and positive. After the anode and the cathode, if you've ever seen anything about electrolysis, they'll have a positive and a negative side. Like they do that when they do colloidal silver. Electrolysis is used to make colloidal silver, and it does a thing, a chemical thing at the ionic level, right? This is the list of ionic forms of essential plant minerals and nutrient elements. On the left side, we have major elements and their micronutrients. On the right side, we have the ionic forms. I'm not going to get into the detail of this because I am not actually a chemical biologist, but this is good information that people have provided, just so you know that actually something is happening. So ion absorption by plant roots is determined by root composition and the mobility of ions in the soil solution. So how do they move is really the question here. They move through mass flow, diffusion, and root interception. Mass flow is the movement of dissolved ions in the water within the soil, like downward movement from rain and irrigation. It's going through the soil, as well as upward movement from evaporation. That's how a lot of these things travel through the soil. So with this downward upward movement occurring in the soil mass through its pores, the major ions moved primarily by mass flow are these, so the nitrate, that's like your rain. Rain is like nitrates. It's the simplest form of nitrogen, right? And so these are basically the ions that move mostly. That's a really solid example of what's happening there. So diffusion is the movement of ions within water films that exist around soil particles. I'm going to take these a little bit slow because there's a lot of words. The driving force being the ion concentration gradient. Always moving from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. So that's the primary force that's moving ionic level elements in the soil. Most ions in solution are moved by diffusion. That's what we just talked about. The movement occurring in very short distances around and between the soil particles. So root interception occurs due to the growth of roots through the soil, which increase root surface contact with soil particles. That makes simple sense, right? What you're looking at there is a graphic representation of the skin of a root. So the hydrophilic head of molecule, I just want you to see molecule there. We're talking about the level of the skin, a molecule on the level of the skin of the root, okay? So molecular cellular root composition and ion channels. This is like the next level. There's ion channels within that skin. They call it the phospholipid bilayer. We don't have to get crazy into that. But the dotted blue channels represent sodium. In this example, striped green, potassium, solid yellow channels, chloride. And this is kind of an idea of what's happening in the soil through the root. So this is all like diffusion so far, guys. This isn't even energy yet, but this is important because this is the main way this stuff happens. Ion channels control ion movement across the cell membrane. The phospholipid bilayer is impermeable to the charged atoms. But if it's open, they'll go right across the channel if they're being drawn by a negative or a positive charge from another element, another molecule. So ions move in predictable ways. Concentration and electrical gradients drive ion movement. Sorry, I'm going to get a better thing for next time. So ions will diffuse from regions of high concentration to low concentration. Diffusion is a passive process, meaning it does not require energy. So why are we talking about it? As long as a pathway exists, like through open ion channels, the ions will move down the concentration gradient. But in addition to concentration gradient, the electrical gradient can also drive ion movement. Ions are attracted to and will move toward regions of opposite charge. So this is kind of an idea of both of the gradients working together. This gives, sort of an idea that it happens in both ways, through diffusion, and this is also through energy and electrical. So ion equilibrium is when both forces are at work. And so when the concentration and electrical gradients for a given ion attain balance, meaning they are equal in strength but in different directions, that ion will be at equilibrium. Ions still move across the membrane through open channels when at equilibrium, but there's no net movement in either direction, meaning there's an equal number of ions moving into the cell as there are moving out of the cell. So this is taking into account diffusion as well as electrical movement of the actual ions, molecules, atoms of the elements that the plants need. So the key points here: the phospholipid bilayer prevents ion movement into or out of the cell. Ion channels allow ion movement across the membrane. Electrochemical gradients drive the direction of ion flow, and it's a combination. At equilibrium, there is no net ion direction movement, but ions are still moving. That's the hard part. And I hope you guys understand by attention through that literally there is something happening with energy from the positive environment. Yeah, from the positive environment in the atmosphere to the negative soil. That's a natural, it's an electromagnetic reality of life that we live in. So is there actually electricity? No, there's about 5 1/trillionths of an amp per square meter. That's about it. So you're not going to be doing a lot of electricity harvesting unless you get real fancy like Tesla and build some really crazy stuff. But we're not getting into that today. I don't know how to personally measure that field very well yet. This is an interesting anecdote. My brother-in-law started his first garden 4 years ago. It was wood mulch and manure, about 12 inches deep. In Sierra Vista, they actually throw some manure in the municipal supply and make some beautiful stuff. He grew Arizona state record-breaking produce and did not even understand how. I started studying electroculture recently and shared this online. He saw it and thought, it must be the copper watering sprinkler. Everything within the reach of that sprinkler, which was just a round spinning sprinkler with two things in it, it was painted with copper paint. It wasn't even fully copper, but the copper was paint. Well, copper was in the paint. 66-pound watermelon, 23-pound cantaloupe, 25-pound butternut squash, and a cabbage 3 times the size of normal. And that was just from, he didn't know what the heck he was doing. Kind of looked like this. So I got a few of these, and I haven't been able to do a real great test with controls. But a couple of the things that I would say about my anecdotes, and I was trying to find good pictures, but I didn't get good pictures of this. I had the grid, like the antenna I showed you in my garden with the L shape. And I had shishito peppers in there, and about 2 to 3, 4 feet away, normal. Maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches long. And then right next to that coil, we got shishito peppers twice the size, twice the diameter, and everything in that grid was healthy and happy, more so than previous times in my garden. And secondly, one other anecdote, I'm almost done here. out in my front garden, I was playing with Brussels sprouts, and I put an electroculture antenna, just about a 7 or 8 foot antenna with wrapped copper around it, and just wrapped it or tied it to the fence and put 2 Brussels sprout plants there. And about 10 feet away, 3 more Brussels sprout plants were over here. And through the winter, those 3 died. And through the entire winter, and even until recently when my wife just ripped them out of the ground, they were alive. They made it all the way through the winter. So what are we talking about? We're talking about energy in the soil. We're also talking about a cover over the soil, which will hold some of that energy and heat and moisture to keep your stuff alive. But I thought it very telling that the one with the antenna was still alive and the one without was dead halfway through winter. So this is a really exciting subject to me, and once my eyes saw, they couldn't unsee, because there's some really interesting information about electrochemical biology that we don't even tap into because we're stuck at experiment. We went from science experiment with 0 knowledge to organic, sustainable permaculture gardens utilizing actual science, wood mulch, manure, worms, mycorrhiza, and electroculture. And that's what my garden's about. I have a really good time in there. I would encourage you guys to learn as much as you can. You're here, so I hope this has inspired you at least to look into some more of these details and try to understand a little bit more yourself. It is really hard reading. I won't lie. I feel like when I get into these papers that talk about this stuff, my eyes start to glaze like I'm in a classroom, and I remember that feeling. But if you keep reading and reading and reading, it's kind of like in the classroom. All of a sudden, all the terms start to click and make sense. And then you can start making some forward progress with understanding these concepts. All right, I'm going to leave it at that because that's the end of my time. And I'm going to give you guys a 10-minute break. So please enjoy some of those refreshments back there. Make a stretch and yeah, what?